Hello, my name is Brian Keneally, and this is my Sensation and Perception video presentation on visual attention. So, what is visual attention and why is it so important? Visual attention is a very critical part of our neural process because it allows us as humans and other animals too to convert visual stimulus into information that can be stored and processed within our brains. Through this process, we take in information that is available externally that we can view with our eyes, and our brain then takes this information and sorts it based on importance. In this way, your brain acts as a filter where everything that you are seeing on the screen, or everything you are reading on a board, or everything you are seeing while you're driving, or anything, it is taking into consideration what this information is, and it is processing and filtering it based on what your brain thinks that you need to remember and keep and what your brain does not. And so from there, it then stores the information that it feels is important for the memory for use later or at the current time. And this complex neural process allows us to do pretty much everything we do on a daily basis, like driving a car, going to class, talking to your boss, going to a job, doing homework, doing anything that you would do during the day that you use your eyes for. You're using this neural process of visual attention. And on an instinctual, very more animalistic level, it allows us to prevent injury to ourselves. And this is kind of, we use it for the functioning of everything we do, but we are doing that because we are trying to make ourselves safe. We are trying to watch out for a curb that we're about to walk into, or while we're driving, making sure we're not looking at our phones and making sure we're paying attention to the road, because using that visual attention is what provides us with the information to keep ourselves safe, to keep ourselves content with what we are doing, and allows us to scan our environment to see if maybe there's a potential harm in that environment. And animals use this all the time too, whether it be a deer looking ahead to see if there's a predator, or a predator looking ahead to see if there's a deer. They will use their visual attention to look at what they are seeing and process this and then act upon that visual stimulus based on their brain. And so when we use this visual attention, we are scanning our surroundings. And when we rapidly shift our eyes focus from one stimulus to another, we are engaging in the act of scanning a scene using a saccadic eye movement. And this is when you'd be looking around and your eyes are moving. You are focusing, as I'm doing right now. You would focus on, say, the picture on my wall, or my dresser, or my computer screen, or my keyboard. It's anything that my eyes are looking at. I am using that saccadic eye movement to actually scan and then hone in on certain fixations within that environment. And so a fixation is when your eye's attention is directed to a specific stimulus. And so this would be when you're scanning an environment, maybe for a friend at a restaurant, and you're looking around, your eyes are looking at each of the faces, and once you have seen your friend, you will fixate on that, and oh, there's my friend, hey, and go over and say hi, or whatever the situation may be. And so there are two different types of focus on stimulus in an environment, and that is overt attention, which is directly looking at said stimulus. And this would be if you're looking at the board in a classroom, you are directly looking at the words on the board, and you are then processing that information. And then there is covert attention, which is focusing on a stimulus without directly looking at it. And a good example of this would be when you're driving. Your overt attention, your eyes are directly focused on the road in front of you, the cars in front of you, and how they're acting and how the traffic is acting, the traffic lights, things like that. But your covert attention would be, say, in your rear view mirror or your peripherals of your side mirrors, and where you are not directly looking at it, but you are keeping that attention to those stimulus. So you are making sure that there's no cars in your blind spot, or yada yada, your speedometer, anything like that. And so actually there's try to test here that you can try to test your visual scanning ability with. And these two specific tests are actually for children. They're assessments for children with ADHD and dyslexia. And from this, as you can see, it is a various rows of the letter R. And within these various letters, there is two letter B's. And so tester would have the child scan this and see they can distinguish within this group of R's where the B's are. And same with this one, we have a bunch of letter M's, and there are two letter N's in there. And there's just one letter N, I apologize. And from this, you would scan it. You would use your visual scanning. You would saccadically move your eyes, that's how you say that, to look at each one of the letters to see, is this an R or is this a B? And from there, your brain will hopefully quickly process each one of these R's and say, that is an R, move to the next letter. That is an R, move to the next letter, until you have found that B, which is the standing one that you are looking for. And these are these kind of things are tricky. I mean, even for a child with dyslexia, for someone without, it requires you to actually fixate your eyes on each of these R's, because if you were just to quickly scan it, you may glance over the B's and you may glance over the N because of how similar the letters are. And so you actually have to fixate on each one of these letters to determine and distinguish with your brain whether this is the letter R, which you are not looking for, and your brain will filter that out. You are not looking for that, you do not need to pay attention to it. Or is it the letter B, which is important to this specific task, and so your brain will then distinguish and pick out that that is not the letter R and that is the letter B. And so the risks of visual attention impairment. Visual attention plays such a key role in almost everything we do as humans every day that it occurs without most of us even realizing, and sometimes even realizing, that it is impaired. The huge potential risks that a person can face from having their visual attention impaired is endless. It can result in a number of things. So something very insignificant as you, say, tripping over a curb while you're maybe texting someone on your phone. You were not looking at the ground. You did not see the curb. You tripped. You fell. That's nothing. But this can also result in a very significant risks for a person, such as a very good example, especially in today's society, is texting while driving. While driving a car at 60 miles an hour, a 2-second glance down at your phone could be the difference between someone in front of you slamming on their brakes. And if you had to just glance your visual attention from this car down to your phone for those 2 seconds, you could be in a very serious car accident, which is a potential risk to yourself or to others. And visual impairment, this isn't where it's not really known, because some people could have visual impairments by their own choice, as if someone says, oh, I'm going to choose to look at my phone right now instead of the road, even though they know they probably should pay attention to the road. Or is it a visual impairment that is due to an actual underlying physical impairment with, say, the person's eyes, whether it's poor vision, maybe they weren't able to see a light and they didn't know it was green, or they weren't able to see a car at night because their night vision is poor, or whatever. Or this could be an actual impairment of the neural process, such as many of the mental disorders that we are known about, or disabilities, or anything that actually will affect that neural process of a person using visual attention. And a good example of this would be someone with dementia. Dementia is very common in people with older age, and the issue with dementia is the person's eyes may be very much functioning. They may be very well able to distinctly pay attention to a stimulus in an environment, but the neural process of the brain actually taking that information and either acting upon it or not and sorting it is where you get the disconnect with patients with dementia. As time goes on, they get slower and slower with tasks that they weren't able to usually not struggle with before, and that's where you get people with dementia not able to drive vehicles anymore, motor vehicles, or able to not perform in a certain job aspect, because they actually have that mental neural break between their eyes using that visual stimulus and gaining it and actually acting upon it. And that's where you get a lot of people with dementia who will say, my grandma, for example, every time I saw her, she did not know who I was. She would see my face. She would probably visually scan my face, but her brain, she would have that disconnect where she wouldn't be able to tell. Her brain would not be able to tell, like, oh, this is someone who is important. These are details that are important. This is your grandson. Or whenever she was driving a car, she wasn't never able to pay attention to the actual speed limit. She would always either go very much over the speed limit or very much under, and that was not necessarily her being able to identify that, but her brain telling her that it's not important. This is not an important detail for this specific situation. And these various impairments can actually very significantly hinder a person's abilities to function on a daily basis when you have things like ADHD and autism, where, again, the person's visual attention may be very much there, but it's a matter of the process of their brain actually depicting each one of these as whether it's important or not. And that's where you get people with, say, ADHD who they may walk out the door knowing they need their wallet. They may look directly at their wallet, but they'll forget they looked directly at their wallet 5 minutes after they walked out the door, and that's because their visual attention was impaired. They were probably quickly moving around or whatever and didn't see it, or this is these are the things that every person has. And another form of visual impairment is actually from the choice of the person. So this could be someone who is drinking and driving. That person has chosen to impair themselves visually and then impair their brain process to actually process this information quickly. And that's where you get a person who is drunk and driving and they get into an accident, is their brain probably wasn't able to process whatever stimulus happened at that current moment that they got into that accident due to the fact that they were under the influence of alcohol or anything else of that sort, like any very mentally impairing, like such as drugs, or something visually impairing, such as someone driving without their glasses. I mean, I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but if I don't drive without I could not functionally drive a car without my glasses. I would be too much visually impaired to even begin to want to drive a car and effectively, efficiently, and safely drive a car. So that's where you get these various visual impairments, and what the gauges of them is based on person to person. And so through that, you get a various visual tests that allow us to put onto data, put onto a, I guess you could say, written stimulus, written fact of this person's ability to actually gauge and see visual stimulus and respond. And we get tested on. Oh, I'm sorry, someone is calling me. I apologize. Uh, we get the visual stimulus attention tests all the time. This is seen in a driving test where when you go to get your license, you have a person examining your ability to process the information while you are doing it and how your brain reacts. And if that tester or assessor sees that the person cannot properly maybe pay attention to the speed limit or properly blah 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 pay attention to the road or whatever, they will mark that down and bring that to the attention of that person, because that is something that they need to be aware of when driving. And you see this with job assessments. They will take into consideration what your abilities are, what your threshold for maybe learning a certain doing a certain task is, learning certain information is, and that from there they're able to gauge exactly what your visual attention abilities are for that person. And this is very important because it allows us to assess each individual's visual attention stimulus. And so, when, like I said, example, taking a driving test, it allows us to distinguish whether a person has that ability to properly and safely operate a motor vehicle or not. And if they do not, whether it's from a physical impairment or a mental impairment, they would be putting themselves and others at a risk for injury or for an accident or for anything by actually operating that motor vehicle if their visual attention threshold is too low or they aren't able to pay attention. And these are very important tests, and there's a various amount of tests here. That's the visual search and attention test, the automatic standout test, test of variable attention, and the integrated visual and auditory test. And these are all tests that will assess a person's abilities and gauge whether they are actually able to perform a certain task or whatever it may be. And so, in conclusion, the visual attention is an essential sensational and perceptual function, as it provides informational basis for almost everything we do on a daily basis, whether it's something very important to us, or the responsibilities of a job or a class, or if it's just leisurely playing a video game or reading a book. We are still always using our visual attention no matter what. And animals goes the same. They are always using that stimulus from their eyes. And this visual attention goes very unacknowledged, I feel, and not for the right reasons, because a lot of people just are not aware of how these processes work, and also how important those factors are into everything that they do on a daily basis. And this, you get this gauge of people who, if you're able to focus, then you're able to focus. But if you're unable to focus, paying attention to these certain functions and why maybe the brain may not function and process something it's very important, and it allows for people to expand their knowledge of this ability and maybe hopefully hone in on their own inherent abilities there, whether they know that they can pay attention to something for a second and they know it, or they need to study it. And that's where you get people with school, where there may be some subjects that come easy to one, but to others they may need to spend a couple hours just to learn one thing. And that's why I find this whole category of topic very, very fascinating, because the variability is so high with humans for all of the different reasons. And someone could have a very, very high visual attention, but their brain may not be able to process that visual attention fast enough for them to properly function, and vice versa. So that's where I find it very interesting, and I thoroughly enjoy this, and I really enjoyed making this video, and I hope that you enjoyed the presentation too. And as a concluding note, I have a funny video link here, and it's I was thinking about playing it, but I ran out of time. And it's a video of people on their phones crashing into things, like walking in. There's a lady who walks into a mall fountain while she's on her phone. I just find it very funny because the smartphones play a huge role in the people not being able to change, and the people being not being able to pay attention. And smartphones provide a very captivating visual stimulus, and for people, they would sometimes rather pay attention to that than their environment. And I just find it funny. It's kind of relevant to what this topic is about, especially with the impairment and the risks. But I thank you for using your brain's visual attention to process this stimulus and watch this video, and hopefully enjoy it. And yeah, thank you and have a good day.